You know, when you hear the name Rothschild, it can conjure up two totally different images. For some, it's all about high finance, incredible wines, philanthropy. But for a whole lot of other people, that name is basically code for a super secret group that's pulling all the strings behind the scenes. So today we're going to separate the legend from the ledger.
Okay, so I want you to picture this. The year is 1815. We are on the floor of the London Stock Exchange, and the air is just electric with tension. Seriously, every single trader in that room knows that the fate of Europe and, let's be real, their own fortunes is being decided right now on a battlefield miles away at a little place called Waterloo. And right there, in the middle of all that chaos, stands one guy, Nathan Meyer Rothschild. Now the legend, the story that's been told for centuries, is that he somehow managed to corner the entire market before the British government itself even got the news about whether Napoleon had won or lost. So the big question is, how on earth did he pull that off?
Well, the story goes like this. Nathan gets word of Napoleon's defeat way before anyone else. He then bribes a fisherman to take him across the English Channel in a crazy storm, and he gets to London a full day ahead of the official government courier. He walks onto the stock exchange floor, he puts on this act like he's devastated, and he starts dumping British government bonds. Well, everyone else panics, right? They think, oh no, Britain must have lost. The market completely tanks. And then, when prices hit rock bottom, his agents quietly swoop in and buy up, well, everything. The next day, the real news arrives, and boom, he's made an absolute fortune.
It is an incredible story, right? Just pure genius and nerve. And it's also completely made up. I mean it. Literally none of that actually happened. So if it's all just a big lie, you have to ask, where did it even come from?
The entire tale was cooked up in this little pamphlet, published way back in 1846. That's a full 30 years after the battle. It was written by a French political writer, a guy named Matthew Georges Darnevale, who, and you can't make this up, used the pen name Satan. And he published it a decade after Nathan Rothschild had died, which is pretty convenient since the man at the center of the story was no longer around to set the record straight.
And the whole thing is just fiction, top to bottom. The legend says he was right there on the battlefield. In reality, he was in London the whole time. The legend talks about this terrifying storm, but, weather records from the time show clear skies. The legend claims he made millions overnight with this massive market manipulation. The reality is, that dramatic story was just invented, even though, yes, he did profit from bond trading around that time like other investors.
So if that incredible legend is a total lie, then what's the truth? Well, the real story of how the Rothschilds rose to power is, you could argue, way more impressive than any conspiracy theory.
And it all starts right here, in the 1740s, in the Frankfurt ghetto. Look, to really get the Rothschilds, you have to understand the world their founder, Mayor Amschel, was born into. It was an incredibly repressive system. Jewish people were forced to live on one street, they weren't allowed to own land, and they were blocked from almost every profession. One of the few jobs open to them was money lending, which often put them in the very difficult position of being debt collectors for their Christian neighbors.
Mayer's genius wasn't really in finance, not at the beginning anyway. It was in understanding people. He started out dealing in rare coins, and that got him noticed by one of Germany's richest noblemen, a guy named Prince William of Hesse. Now, he used that connection not for a quick payday, but to build something far more valuable, social capital. He earned the title court agent, which was basically a stamp of approval that broadcasted to the rest of Europe, this man can be trusted. And that trust, that became the real foundation for his own bank.
But Mayer's true masterstroke, his most brilliant idea, was creating something the world had never really seen before. A private, international banking network run entirely and exclusively by his own family. He sent his 5 sons to the 5 most important cities in Europe.
And this just shows you the sheer scale of what they were building. You had Amschel holding down the fort in Frankfurt. Salomon went to Vienna to handle the massive Austrian Empire. Nathan, of course, took on London, the financial capital of the world. Karl managed southern Europe from Naples, and James set up shop in Paris, right in the heart of post-Napoleon France. I mean, together they had the entire continent covered.
And the way this network operated was just next level. They had their own private courier system with horses and boats that was way faster than any king's official mail. All their letters were written in a special cipher so spies couldn't read them. And maybe most important of all, in an era where everyone was betraying everyone else, the 5 brothers trusted each other completely. Their loyalty was to the family, not to any one country, which made them the go-to stable financial partner for pretty much everybody.
So what could this network actually do? Well, check this out.
In 1875, the British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, finds out that Egypt is about to sell its controlling shares in the Suez Canal to France. Parliament isn't in session. He has literally hours to get the money. So he sends a single note to the Rothschilds bank. The loan for £4 million, which is hundreds of millions in today's money, was approved on the spot. Britain got the canal, and the Rothschilds proved they could move faster than governments themselves.
Their financial power was just staggering. When Britain passed the Slavery Abolition Act in 1833, the government needed £20 million. That's a huge sum, 40% of the government's entire yearly budget back then. They needed it to compensate slave owners for their property. And where did they get the money? They borrowed the entire amount from Nathan Rothschild's bank. And get this, British taxpayers only finished paying off that loan in 2015.
Okay, so if the real story is all this documented history of finance and influence, why does that ridiculous Waterloo myth not only survive, but morph into the wild conspiracies we see all over the internet today?
Well, a big part of the answer comes down to psychology. It's something called confirmation bias. It's this powerful little quirk in our brains. Because the Rothschilds were genuinely incredibly wealthy and powerful, it wasn't a huge leap for people who already had anti-Semitic beliefs to think, well, then they must secretly control everything. The lie felt true to them because it just confirmed a prejudice they already had. And you can literally draw a straight line from that little pamphlet in 1846 to the most absurd theories you see online today. The core accusation just gets a modern makeover. It started with manipulating stock markets, then it evolved into controlling governments and the media. And now, in our time, it's just evolved into absolute nonsense about using space lasers to start wildfires in California.
All right, let's just do a quick rapid-fire debunking of some of these modern myths. Do they own a U.S. Federal Reserve? Nope. Do they control the weather? No. Was Mr. Burns from The Simpsons based on them? No, the show's creator has confirmed that's not true. And are they secretly worth $500 trillion? Absolutely not. That's more money than exists on the entire planet.
The truth is, the very world that allowed the Rothschilds to have that unique kind of power, well, it pretty much disappeared in the 20th century. The world wars just shattered their European network. The rise of powerful central banks like the Fed made their job as a private lender of last resort totally obsolete. And over the generations, that massive family fortune was simply divided up among hundreds and hundreds of heirs.
Today, their legacy is still really significant, but it looks a lot different. Rothschild & Co. is a very respected investment bank, but it's not the global behemoth of the conspiracies. They produce some of the most famous wines in the world. Their incredible estates like Waddesdon Manor are now public trusts for everyone to visit. And their symbolic importance is reflected in things like the Balfour Declaration, which was addressed to Lord Rothschild as a prominent figure in the Jewish community.
See, the conspiracies are all built on this fantasy of total secret control. But the real story, the documented history of a family rising from a ghetto to become bankers to kings and empires, that's not only true, it's the most powerful weapon we have against the myth.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big question. We all know that a good lie, a juicy myth, can spread like wildfire, especially online. But the truth? It's often more complicated, it's got more nuance, and it really struggles to keep up. So the question for all of us is, what can we do? How do we help the truth finally put its shoes on and start to catch up?